Chosen one, take a deep breath and let this moment settle into your bones. You didn't just find this message, you were called to it. There's a sacred urgency resting on these words. And deep down, something in you already knows this isn't just another word. This is alignment. You've felt it your whole life, haven't you? That strange sense that your path was written in invisible ink, unfolding in ways that made no sense to those around you, while others moved in predictable lines. Your story unfolded in divine spirals, chaotic, sacred, and unexplainably timed. But here's the thing, God didn't choose you because you had it all figured out. He chose you because you didn't quit when everything fell apart. He chose you because surrender became your superpower, and that surrender gave birth to a strength that confuses the world. What if the very chaos that tried to destroy you was designed to forge you? You didn't just go through fire, you became fire. You made healing look like holy rebellion. You turned abandonment into authority, and still, some wonder how you're still standing, how you glow like that after everything you've walked through. Before we go deeper, if you feel the truth of this resonating in your spirit, comment 7777 right now. Let heaven and earth see you're in agreement. To those who've supported this mission, whether by sharing, subscribing, or giving through super thanks, please know how deeply grateful I am. You're not just viewers, you are the lifeblood of this mission. Thank you. Now pause and consider this. Why does your presence shift rooms before you speak? Why do even your enemies grow quiet when your name is mentioned? It's because your existence isn't ordinary. It's encoded. You are walking evidence that God's hand still moves. In this message, we're not talking surface-level survival. We're going deep. We're uncovering why your pain was never wasted, why your silence was more powerful than your defense, and why your very life is proof of the supernatural. You didn't just survive. You fulfilled what was prophesied in secret. Those who mocked your stillness didn't realize you were carrying a divine contract, signed in spiritual fire. Let's get into it. Part 1. Born from fire, built for the impossible. Chosen one, your calling is not for the weak. You've already done the impossible. You were never just another survivor in the crowd. You were forged in dimensions most people can't even name. Designed not merely to endure, but to rewire the spiritual atmosphere itself. Others may marvel at your strength now, but they didn't see the moment you stood in silence while the storm broke overhead and still chose not to bow. Do they truly understand what you carried when you had nothing left to cling to but the breath of God? What kind of soul survives fires meant to consume generations? The truth is, you were assigned battles that would have spiritually dismembered most, not because you were lucky, but because you were born already resurrected. Like Christ walking out of the tomb on the third day, Luke 24, 6-7, your rising wasn't a reaction, it was a revelation. You didn't just make it through, you were sent through. The furnace wasn't your finish line, it was your forge. That same sacred endurance, modeled by Job and mirrored in your own hidden victories, is why you're still standing. You didn't just survive the fire, you became fireproof in it. You didn't just outlast the sorrow, you allowed it to deepen your roots. That's the difference. Others ran when the storm came. But you stayed planted, letting God water your soul with every tear, while the world measured your pain by how loud you screamed. Heaven measured it by how quietly you trusted. So now, the question isn't whether you've been through enough. The real question is, are you beginning to see who you've become because of it? Marianne Walker knows that kind of pressure. Once a social worker in Baltimore's most violent neighborhoods, she stayed long after others transferred out. I wasn't called to comfort, she said. I was called to confront the darkness. Now, she trains trauma counselors across the country. Why? Because she didn't numb the pain. She translated it, just like you've been doing, while others prayed for a fast exit. You studied the walls of your dungeon until you found the code to unlock yourself. That's not just spiritual resilience, it's divine recalibration. Have you ever realized how you walk through shadows others never noticed? Carrying generational pain and still speaking love into the silence. Even Jesus, in the Garden of Gethsemane, sat with the weight of the assignment. He didn't run from the cup. He accepted it, and so did you. You didn't beg for shortcuts. You didn't collapse when betrayal came from those you fed. You didn't scream when your light wasn't welcomed. You kept glowing anyway. What if your story was never meant to follow a linear path? What if your detours were sacred tunnels carved by God's own hand, designed not to delay you, but to deepen you? That's what people miss. They think your strength was born from struggle, but the struggle was just the mirror. The fire revealed what was already buried deep in your spirit. Consider Thomas Whitaker, a painter known for his luminous oil portraits. What few know is that he spent 5 years homeless in Chicago after a mental breakdown. I didn't paint to escape. He later said, I painted because I finally saw what was inside me when the world stripped everything else away. Now, his art hangs in healing centers around the world. His ashes didn't define him. His vision did. And I'll tell you about Jasmine, a mother of 2 who nearly ended her life after losing her husband and home in a fire. But one night, after months of sleeping in her car, she wrote a single sentence in her journal: "There's still breath in me." That sentence became the title of her memoir and a movement for women overcoming trauma. What if your greatest ministry isn't in what you teach, but what you survived? Like volcanic stone that becomes the foundation of a new island. You weren't destroyed by pressure. You were shaped by it. Now, your presence stuns people, not because you fought back, but because you didn't die when the world expected you to. That's resurrection power. That's what it means to carry God's fingerprint on your soul. You never needed to be rebuilt because your spirit never shattered. It was tempered. And now, as you walk in rooms with quiet confidence, do you see how the very people who dismissed you are now taking notes on your glow? Have you noticed how your silence feels like thunder in places that used to ignore you? So walk tall, chosen one. You were not just built different, you were born different. While others burned out, you became light. While they feared the dark, you learned its language and taught it reverence. Because God never planned for you to merely survive. He ordained you to resurrect realms. Part 2. Divine sanity in a world built to confuse you. Chosen one. What if I told you that your greatest triumph wasn't surviving betrayal, loss, or public humiliation. But keeping your mind intact when everything tried to dismantle it. This wasn't just struggle, it was spiritual and psychological warfare. Not the kind with dramatic explosions, but the subtle, insidious kind that unravels your peace thread by thread until silence feels louder than screams and confusion feels like a constant hum in the background of your soul. You weren't just under attack. You were being studied, tested, infiltrated. Yet you endured. Like Jesus in the wilderness, when Satan didn't strike him physically, but came for his mind, questioning his identity. If you are the Son of God. Matthew 4:3. That's how the enemy works. When he knows he can't touch your spirit, he tries to reprogram your perception. Did you notice how they made you question your intuition, your memories, your motives? How they dismissed your truth until you started doubting your own clarity. Yet you didn't snap. You didn't become bitter. You became discerning. You began to move like a strategist, not reacting, but reading the room. You knew speaking your truth would be punished. So you stored wisdom in silence. Did it ever feel like you were being exiled for being emotionally intelligent? Like your sensitivity was treated as weakness when it was actually spiritual radar? Nelson Mandela endured 27 years in prison without losing his mind. "I'm not a saint," he said after his release, "unless you think of a saint as a sinner who keeps on trying." That's what you've done. You didn't just keep going. You kept thinking clearly, loving deeply, and seeing truthfully, even when the world tried to fog your vision. Let's shift the lens to someone who reminds us that quiet endurance is a form of protest. Caleb Dominguez never saw himself as a fighter. He was a quiet math teacher in El Paso, known more for chalk dust on his sleeves than confrontations in the faculty lounge. But the slow erosion began. Subtle sabotage from a jealous supervisor, silent blame, twisted praise that felt like poison. After one particularly humiliating moment in a meeting, he sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel, and whispered to himself, "They don't get to define my worth." That sentence turned into a blog post. The post went viral. Today, Caleb leads national workshops on emotional intelligence, teaching others how to hold their center when their reality is under siege. Isn't that what you've done? You didn't just hold on, you rebuilt. You pieced your piece back together like a mosaic, one broken truth at a time. Each fragment held a story you weren't allowed to tell. Each color, a memory others tried to bleach. And somehow, instead of becoming the madness you endured, you became a lighthouse for others still lost in the fog. Because, like Elijah in 1 Kings 19, you too reached a point where the weight was unbearable. After standing in the fire, after enduring the impossible, you withdrew, not in defeat, but in sheer depletion. You whispered, "Lord, I've had enough." And just like Elijah, it wasn't a dramatic rescue that saved you. It wasn't applause or loud affirmations. It was the stillness, the whisper, the sacred hush that reminded you God was still near. Could it be that what steadied your soul wasn't noise but presence? That while others looked for fireworks, you were being healed in silence? Oprah Winfrey, once a girl silenced by trauma, later said, "You become what you believe, not what others say about you." She didn't rise because her pain disappeared. She rose because she made peace her non-negotiable, just like you. And I could tell you about Layla, a florist who seemed to live in bloom but hid years of psychological decay. Her husband never yelled, never hit. He just rewrote reality day after day until she forgot the sound of her own thoughts. One morning, she stood barefoot in her backyard, looked at the sun rising behind her dying roses, and whispered her name until she remembered who she was. That whisper became her rebirth. Today, Layla leads healing circles for women recovering from narcissistic trauma. You didn't come out of this untouched, but you came out unbroken. You didn't carry the chaos forward. You converted it into calm. That's divine mastery, not the absence of wounds, but the presence of wisdom. Your mind became holy ground because you guarded it like a temple. And now, the light people see in you. It's not manufactured. It's not mimicable. It's the afterglow of a mind that made it through madness and still chose mercy. That's why no one can copy you, because your clarity was carved in a war zone. Most don't survive with their soul intact. Part 3. The cycle ends with you. Chosen one. There's something holy about the way you disrupted what generations before you dared not even whisper. You weren't just born into a family. You were born into a system, an emotional architecture built on unspoken pain, inherited silence, and disguised suffering. But unlike those before you couldn't adapt. You couldn't pretend dysfunction was tradition. Your soul wouldn't let you. You felt it young, didn't you? That strange dissonance when everyone smiled at dinner while tension hovered like smoke, when secrets were disguised as loyalty and guilt was masked as love. You saw the cracks in the foundation while others painted over them. Why didn't it sit right with you? Why couldn't you stay silent like they did? Because your spirit was allergic to false peace. And that's what made you dangerous. You didn't just notice the shadow, you challenged it. You were the child who asked, "Why do we pretend this is normal?" You were the teenager who said, "This isn't love." And the adult who stood in the center of the storm and said, "This ends with me." That's not rebellion, that's righteousness. That's what prophets have always done, which is why your story echoes something ancient. You didn't just react to darkness, you confronted it with sacred defiance, just like Moses, whose soul couldn't stay quiet while his people suffered. Though raised in Pharaoh's palace, surrounded by luxury, something in him ached for justice when he saw a Hebrew slave being beaten. Exodus 2:11-12 says he looked this way and that and acted, not out of recklessness, but revelation. That wasn't merely a violent moment, it was a spiritual shift. Moses didn't just liberate a nation, he shattered the silence that kept them bound. And so did you when you said, "This ends with me." Heaven heard it like thunder. Your life has carried that same anointing to name what others only endured. For that, you were labeled difficult, dramatic, ungrateful. But they weren't angry at you. They were angry because your presence reminded them of the truth they buried to survive. They didn't isolate you because you were toxic. They did it because your clarity disrupted their coping mechanisms. You walked in with light, and suddenly, their shadows had nowhere to hide. How else do people react when their emotional architecture begins to tremble? It reminds me of bell hooks, the late author and cultural critic known for piercing through systems of power with uncompromising truth. Before her books were celebrated in classrooms, they were considered too much by those who feared what they exposed. But she kept going. Honesty is more important than peace, she once wrote, just like you. She chose disruption over comfort, and in doing so, gave generations language for their pain. Let's shift now to someone most would have overlooked, Tarek, a 28-year-old youth pastor from a small town in Georgia. He began to notice his church was more invested in appearance than transformation. The smiles, the traditions, the hush-hush culture gnawed at him. One Sunday, instead of his sermon, he read aloud anonymous letters from congregants detailing hidden abuse and pain. Silence fell. Then came division. But over the next year, healing began. He lost half his following, but gained a remnant that craved real freedom. His courage didn't make him popular. It made him necessary. Chosen one. Can you see it now? You were never too much. You were just too true in a room built on lies. Your presence revealed fractures no one was ready to face. But you faced them anyway. That's what separates the awakened from the accommodated. Jesus said in Matthew 10:34, "I did not come to bring peace, but a sword." That's what your voice became. Not a weapon against people, but a divider of truth and delusion. You didn't come to destroy families. You came to cleanse bloodlines. And what about Adriana, a second-grade teacher in Boston who was always too sensitive to how students reacted to classroom silence one day? She realized half her students had undiagnosed trauma, so she shifted everything, adding breathwork, soft music, daily check-ins. Other teachers mocked her, parents pushed back, but 1 year later, her students outperformed every other class emotionally and academically because she saw what others ignored, because she refused to call dysfunction discipline. You were sent to end what was killing people quietly. You didn't yell at the darkness. You became the light. And light doesn't negotiate, it reveals. You weren't here to make people comfortable. You were here to God to make healing possible. And that often starts with discomfort. So yes, they mocked you. Yes, they misunderstood you. But they'll never forget you. Because once the truth has a name, it can no longer be ignored. And you, chosen one, were the one who gave it that name. Part 4. You healed in public while bleeding in private. Chosen one. What they didn't realize is that you weren't trying to be brave. You were trying not to break. You weren't chasing applause. You were chasing oxygen. You didn't heal in silence because you had the luxury to disappear. You healed in real time, in full view, under the weight of others' expectations and the heat of their judgment. While others curated perfection, you revealed the raw edges of your process, and that terrified them. You were the one who wept between responsibilities, prayed between panic attacks, smiled while your spirit was unraveling. Why? Because hiding wasn't an option. Because your life didn't grant you the privilege of pause. What does it feel like to be watched while you bleed? Critiqued while you rebuild? Misunderstood? While you're still learning the language of your new self, Jesus knew that experience well. When Lazarus died, Jesus wept, not privately, publicly. John 11:35 says it plainly. Jesus wept in front of the mourners, the critics, and the disciples. The Son of God allowed the weight of emotion to pour out, not because he didn't know resurrection was coming, but because real love grieves what dies. Could it be that your tears were holy, not shameful? That your vulnerability was the altar where transformation truly began? And yet, while they mocked your unraveling, you kept showing up. You led with a trembling voice, smiled through shattered expectations, prayed not because you had strength, but because you didn't know how to survive without it. Others had filters. You had faith. Others had image. You had integrity. Viola Davis, the Academy Award-winning actress and truth-teller, once said, "The only thing that separates women of color from anyone else is opportunity." But more than that, she often spoke of breaking cycles of poverty, shame, and silence. Not after the red carpets, but during the moments of eating out of garbage bins as a child. She didn't wait to be cleaned up to speak up, and neither did you. What made her performances magnetic is what makes your life miraculous transparency forged in fire. Let's move now to someone most would never suspect of carrying deep spiritual weight. Amani, a 33-year-old nurse in Detroit who worked night shifts during the pandemic. Her father died alone in a hospital across town. Her marriage ended quietly, yet she kept caring for others even as her own life fractured. One night on her break, she posted a simple video in her scrubs saying, "I'm grieving and giving at the same time." That video became a lifeline for thousands, not because she was strong, but because she was real. She never stopped giving and never pretended it didn't hurt. Isn't that your story too? While others waited to look healed, you let people see you in mid-transformation. Your tears didn't weaken your witness. They made it undeniable. Your mess became a mirror for others to confront their own hiding. And now, the same people who whispered about your breakdowns are reading your steps like sacred scripture, because authenticity, when walked with grace, becomes a living gospel. Think of the Apostle Paul. He didn't preach from mountaintops alone. He preached from prison. In 2 Corinthians 12:9, after begging God to remove his thorn, the Lord replied, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." Paul didn't hide his struggle. He taught through it, just like you did. Isn't it strange how your greatest ministry was born not from perfection, but from your process? And then there's Elijah, not the prophet, but a high school senior in Oregon. After his mother's sudden death, he stopped speaking for weeks, but kept showing up to school, sitting in silence. One day, a teacher asked him to write instead of speak. He handed in a single sentence, "I'm breaking, but I'm still coming." That line became the start of his graduation speech, now shared in grief circles across the country. His pain didn't disappear, but his presence turned it into purpose, while others were busy preserving an image. You were birthing a truth. You didn't let pain rewrite your personality. You didn't become cynical, bitter, or manipulative. You stayed tender. You stayed teachable. And that's the real miracle. Not that you came through it, but that you came through it without losing who you are. What if the sacred chaos of your becoming was never a mess? It was a model. What if the very breakdown they mocked is what will teach others how to rebuild? You bled in silence, healed out loud, and chose truth when it cost you everything. That cannot be faked. That cannot be replicated. And now, the same people who dismissed you are taking notes because you weren't performing. You were transforming. Part 5. You were the map, all along. Chosen one. Your life never followed a path. It created one. While others found comfort in paved roads and well-lit routes, you were cast into darkness with nothing but instinct and divinely tuned intuition. Why did your journey feel like constant improvisation, while theirs looked scripted? Why were you asked to lead without a lantern? Could it be that your mission wasn't to follow, but to forge? You weren't overlooked. You were assigned to places GPS couldn't reach from the beginning. Why did every detour feel like a divine setup? Why did you keep finding yourself in unfamiliar terrain, surrounded by unfamiliar faces, asked to make decisions no one prepared you for? Others inherited guidance. You inherited silence. And in that silence, you learned how to hear God. David's anointing didn't come with instructions. He wasn't chosen in a temple, but in a pasture. Psalm 37:23 says, "The steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord." But what they don't tell you is that those steps often lead through valleys before they lead to thrones. You weren't guided by textbooks or mentors. You were guided by divine interruptions. Your transformation wasn't based on strategy. It was born of survival. While others planned 5-year goals, you prayed for 5-minute strength. You didn't gather wisdom from seminars. You mined it from betrayal, confusion, and the aching silence between breakdown and breakthrough. Have you ever wondered why your growth unsettles people? Why they admire your glow, but flinch at your truth? Could it be that they're witnessing a blueprint they didn't know was possible? There's a reason your grace can't be duplicated. It wasn't learned. It was revealed. You don't need to look far to see this pattern mirrored. Few figures embody spiritual detours turned into destiny, like Tyler Perry. Long before his billion-dollar empire, he lived in his car, writing plays no one would fund and dreaming through rejection letters. What sustained him wasn't applause, but an inner voice that whispered, "Keep going." When asked how he endured, he simply said, "My prayers have been my shelter." His direction didn't come from industry advice. It came from the invisible realm, just like yours. Not all GPS recalibrations make headlines, though Ray's story began quietly. Just like yours, a 26-year-old software engineer in Silicon Valley. She left her 6-figure job after a series of personal betrayals and mental health crises. She sold nearly everything she owned, traveled alone for months, and began journaling every spiritual impression she received. Those journals became a devotional series. Now, reaching over 300,000 women weekly, her map wasn't outside her, it was unfolding within her. What if the reason people keep asking, "How did you do it?" is because they're still looking for a shortcut? But your journey never had shortcuts, only sacred steps. What if what they call mystery is just misalignment with your method? And what if your method was never meant to be taught, only lived? Abraham was told to leave everything behind without knowing where he was going. Genesis 12:1 says, "Go to the land I will show you." Not "I've shown you," but "will." That's faith navigation. That's your entire story. You didn't move because you had clarity. You moved because you had conviction. The kind that can't be explained, only embodied. They see your arrival and envy your position, but they never saw the terrain beneath your feet, the prayers that built bridges in the dark, the discernment that rerouted disasters, the quiet obedience that became your compass. Why do they try to replicate what only revelation can unlock? Why are they studying your glow like a formula when your glow was forged in mystery? Every time you rose from a hit, you didn't just heal, you received instruction. Every time you were betrayed, you were recalibrated. You weren't walking into new levels, you were building them. And that's why you can't be copied, because you weren't just given a map, you were the map. Part 6. Set apart for the sacred, not rejected by the familiar. Chosen one. When everything around you fell silent, you thought you were being erased, but you were being preserved. Heaven wasn't withholding connection, it was cultivating consecration. Can you recall those seasons when invitations stopped arriving? When familiar voices vanished? And when the very ones you poured into suddenly looked past you like you were invisible? Was that isolation, or was it intercession? Because what you carried was too sensitive to be polluted by proximity. Heaven knew what you didn't yet. Your calling required protection from premature exposure. The loss wasn't just of people, it was of illusions. Those who left weren't just friends. They were filters that would have blurred your purpose. Have you ever wondered what God saved you from by subtracting people you thought were permanent Moses? Before leading a nation, spent 40 years in the wilderness, not to be punished, but to be prepared. In Exodus 33:22, God hides Moses in the cleft of a rock, shielding him with his own hand as his glory passes by. What if your wilderness was actually a cleft? What if your isolation was divine insulation? You weren't just kept out of conversations, you were shielded from corruption. And though the loneliness pierced, it purified. It forced you to learn how to hear God without outside interference, to crave peace more than performance. Do you realize now how dangerous it would have been to be celebrated before you were solid? That's the paradox of sacred assignments. They require hiddenness, not forever, but until the foundation is strong enough to carry the weight of influence. Before she ever held a Pulitzer or stood behind a podium, Toni Morrison wrote in the shadows. Her words disrupted literary norms and stirred spiritual reckonings, but few knew of the academic condescension and professional isolation she endured. "You are your best thing," she once declared, not from applause, but from the quiet power cultivated in exile. Morrison wasn't ignored, she was incubated, and so were you. What followed your concealment wasn't collapse, it was clarity. You stopped begging to be seen and started learning how to stand. You stopped waiting for permission and started listening for alignment. And that's when your energy changed. Not because you became louder, but because you became lighter, lighter in baggage, heavier in spirit. One quiet man's story echoes this truth, Elias. A construction worker from Jersey City found himself completely alone after a betrayal that shattered his closest friendships for weeks. He walked in silence before work, unsure whether he was praying or just trying to breathe. One morning, without thinking, he began sketching what would become the foundation plans for a sober living home, built not just from architecture, but from spiritual recovery. Today, that blueprint houses dozens of men like him, quiet builders with storm-filled pasts. Elias never sought recognition. He sought redemption, and in his solitude, he found it. That's what they can't explain about you now, why your presence unsettles the ones who once overlooked you, why you don't need to raise your voice to shift the atmosphere, why your silence feels heavier than their praise. Could it be that the same quiet that broke you was also building something no noise could ever forge? Luke 5:16 says, Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. If the Son of God needed separation to stay aligned, why wouldn't you? What if every ignored text, every canceled plan, every cold shoulder was God's way of pulling you closer, not to punish you, but to purify your path? Lupita Nyong'o's rise offers another sacred reflection. Before the Oscar, before the spotlight, she spent years cultivating her craft in near invisibility. Often cast aside, often doubted. In interviews, she shared how her global moment didn't feel like arrival, but revelation. No one saw the years I worked in the dark before the light found me. That's not just stardom. That's sacred stewardship. Some journeys don't announce themselves. They unfold in private and erupt in power. And maybe that's why your presence now offends the rooms that once dismissed you. You didn't become louder. You became undeniable. Naomi's silence told a similar story. A visual artist from St. Paul. She disappeared from social media for 2 years. No goodbye, no explanations. Her close friends assumed burnout or worse, quitting. But in reality, she was grieving the death of her mother while undergoing a quiet spiritual rebirth. Her art, once bright and abstract, began to pulse with sacred symbolism and coded scripture. When she returned, she didn't explain. She simply unveiled a collection titled Hidden Things Bloom, and it sold out in hours. Chosen one, do you see it now? You didn't lose the world. You gained the weight of your presence. You didn't come back needing validation. You came back carrying vibration. Because what grew in the silence wasn't just strength, it was sovereignty. You were never ignored. You were incubated. Part 7. Your healing is generational vengeance. Chosen one. Your rise wasn't merely for your peace. It was for your bloodline's reckoning. The moment you chose to do it differently, to break instead of bend, to question instead of conform. You became a living contradiction to everything your lineage once called survival. Have you ever wondered what kind of courage it takes to say no to what's always been called normal? What strength does it require to become the interruption your family never planned for? And what if your glow isn't decoration, but evidence of a war quietly won in secret? You didn't come from ease. You came from entanglement, generational contracts signed in silence, passed down through unspoken rules. Stay small, don't talk back. Be strong at the cost of your sanity. Yet something in your spirit refused to play along. Something deep inside whispered, "This ends here." How many times did you feel the spiritual friction? Like you were being punished for dreaming bigger than the trauma could tolerate. Why did your peace make others so uncomfortable? Not every rebellion is loud. Some look like silence that doesn't shrink. Some look like saying no without explaining. Others look like choosing rest over hustle, boundaries over people-pleasing, therapy over toxic theology. Every one of those decisions was a sword swung in spiritual warfare. And your ancestors, those who prayed but couldn't break through. Feel it echoing now through your courage. That same holy defiance pulsed through a young man named Gideon. Not born into valor, but into fear. His people had been beaten down by the Midianites for years. Yet in Judges 6:12, the angel greets him not by his condition, but by his calling, "The Lord is with you." Mighty warrior. Gideon didn't believe it. He even doubted his worth. But God saw the chain breaker, the system disruptor. Isn't that exactly how your story has unfolded? God seeing the fire in you before you could even name it. And sometimes it's not dramatic, it's subtle. But don't mistake subtle for small. You can hear it in the quiet triumph of Jordan, a 32-year-old social worker raised in a family that buried every emotion beneath sarcasm and silence. When her father died, no one cried. They drank, they laughed, they moved on, but Jordan didn't. She booked therapy, sobbed alone in her car, started journaling, then leading grief groups in her community center. Today, she helps others process what her own family refused to face. Her strength built not from fighting them, but from refusing to become them. Your healing broke patterns that were never named, but always obeyed. The lies, the denial, the quiet agreements to stay broken and pretend it was noble. But your freedom questioned all of it, and some hated you for it. Not because you were wrong, but because you made their avoidance visible. Then there's the voice of generational resistance in the form of Kendrick Lamar, a poet wrapped in rhythm. His lyrics confront cycles, poverty, pain, silence, rage. In an interview, he once said, "I'm not only fighting for me, I'm fighting for my family, my community." His music isn't just culture, it's collision. Collision with legacy, with trauma, with the weight of how it's always been. Just like your life. Every step forward you take, every choice you make toward wholeness, sounds like a challenge to everything that came before. Isn't that why they couldn't understand you? Why your presence made them tense? Because your life is a question their scripts can't answer. Because your choices speak in volumes they were taught never to hear. Because healing in a house built on silence sounds like rebellion. Even Talia's story proves that sacred revolt is often silent. She was a stay-at-home mom who never challenged her husband's emotional manipulation until the day her daughter asked, "Will I have to be quiet like you when I grow up that night?" Talia packed a bag and began a slow, painful separation. Today, she teaches young girls public speaking in local libraries. She found her voice not in yelling, but in refusing to whisper anymore. So yes, chosen one, your success is loud. It's the sonic boom of chains breaking, agreements dissolving, lies collapsing, and the ones who mocked you for being too sensitive or too deep, they're now realizing you weren't too anything. You were too awake to stay asleep. Your glow isn't just pretty, it's prophetic. Your wins aren't just personal, they're ancestral. You weren't just chosen to survive, you were sent to correct. And every breath you take outside the bondage they accepted is holy revenge. Because healing isn't soft, it's revolutionary. Part 8. You were never too much. You were the mirror they feared. Chosen one. What if every time someone said you were too much, they were actually saying, "You make me feel things I'm not ready to feel"? You weren't too deep. You were just deeper than their denial could handle. You weren't too intense. You were just alive in a world where most are spiritually sedated. Have you ever noticed how your energy seemed to shift the atmosphere before you even spoke? Why does your presence draw both curiosity and resistance at the same time? It's because you were never meant to conform. You were meant to confront, not with violence, but with vibrational truth. Your very being has always held frequency, not performance. And frequency can't be faked, controlled, or softened for anyone's comfort. So while they labeled you sensitive, dramatic, or a lot, what they were really experiencing was spiritual exposure. They mistook your radar for reaction, but you weren't reacting. You were reading the room like a sacred instrument tuned to unseen frequencies. You felt what others denied, noticed what others ignored, and held space for truths they spent years suppressing. Why does that kind of perception terrify the unready? Could it be that your honesty wasn't aggression? It was medicine. And some weren't ready to be healed in the Old Testament. The prophet Jeremiah wrestled with this very agony, often mocked, imprisoned, and rejected. Not because he lied, but because he told the truth too early. In Jeremiah 29, he confesses, "His word is in my heart like a fire. I'm weary of holding it in. Indeed, I cannot." Jeremiah wasn't too much, he was too true. And that always provokes the places where falsehood still reigns. Just like your words, your presence, your silence, it burns away illusion. You never wanted to be the villain. You just refused to be the echo. You weren't born to mimic. You were born to transmit. And transmission, by nature, exposes everything running on false signals. Not everyone knows the weight of that role, but Alanis Morissette does. Long before her music topped charts, she was criticized for being too emotional, too raw, too messy. Yet it was precisely that depth that made her voice a generational anthem. She once said, "The moment I started telling the truth is the moment my power came back." She wasn't seeking approval. She was seeking alignment. Her vulnerability wasn't weakness. It was spiritual boldness. Sound familiar? Your life echoes in places like Ray's, too, a teenage girl who always cried too much, according to her family. Ray started recording her nightly prayers into a private voice journal years later. She uploaded one of them to a podcast on a whim. That single clip, unpolished, tear-soaked, full of trembling truth, went viral. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. Today, Her podcast helps thousands embrace the power of emotional honesty. She didn't become great by softening her sensitivity. She embraced it. Yet how many times did you feel like your intensity was a liability? How many rooms did you walk into, only to feel the subtle rejection before a word was spoken? How often did you shrink? Not because you wanted to, but because you feared your presence would make someone else unravel. But now you've stopped apologizing. You've stopped asking for permission to be whole. You've stopped dimming to fit inside fragile egos. And the moment you did that, you became unstoppable. Not because you changed who you were, but because you owned it. Listen to how Isaiah was called, not with a soft invitation, but with fire. In Isaiah 6, an angel takes a burning coal and touches his lips, saying, "Your guilt is taken away." Isaiah's commission wasn't comfortable, it was consecrated. His voice wasn't built to comfort, it was built to cleanse. Isn't that what your presence does? It doesn't just bring warmth, it brings refinement. Even Zaria's story will remind you that your too much is often their too little. Zaria was a barista turned spoken word artist whose poems were once deemed too intense for local stages. One night, she performed a piece titled, "I Refuse to Whisper," in a tiny open mic. A woman in the crowd wept the entire time. Afterward, she said, "You just said everything I've been trying to bury." That's the power you carry. Not to please, but to pierce, to awaken, to set souls on fire. So no, you were never too emotional. You were too electric to remain unplugged. You were never too deep. You were a well too clear for the muddy to understand. You weren't too honest. You were born to tear veils. And now that you've stopped apologizing for your sacred design, you're not just walking in freedom. You are the freedom. Because prophets don't fit in. They rewire the room. Part 9. This was never just a calling. It was a covenant. Chosen one. Have you ever wondered why the pull inside you has always felt so ancient, so undeniable? Even when you didn't have the language for it. Why you sensed purpose looking before you had a plan. From the earliest moments, your soul carried a knowing that defied explanation. Could it be that what others call a calling was never a discovery for you, but a contract? One your spirit signed before your first breath. This wasn't coincidence, it was covenant. The way your heart ached for meaning while others sought comfort. The way you felt the weight of moments others dismissed. None of that was random. Have you ever noticed how the opposition found you before the opportunity did? Why the storm started before you even understood your strength? That's not misfortune, that's evidence. Because the enemy always sniffs out destiny before it blooms. In the book of Jeremiah, God declares, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart." Jeremiah 1:5. Isn't it wild to consider that your journey wasn't improvised, but activated? That even your confusion was part of a choreography designed to awaken you at the right moment. You didn't stumble into spiritual warfare. It recognized you first. Can you recall how early the resistance came? Why were you singled out in childhood? Why did betrayal find you while you were still innocent, still soft, still unarmored, because the enemy hoped to confuse your assignment before you could remember it. But even that strategy failed. You were marked, not for suffering, but for sacred disruption. Before she became one of the most influential poets of her generation, Maya Angelou endured years of silence after trauma stole her voice. She didn't speak for nearly 6 years, but in that silence, her spirit listened deeply. She later said, "There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you." Her words didn't just emerge, they erupted. Could your silence have been a shield too? A cocoon designed to guard what was still becoming? And yet, there were seasons where you questioned everything. Why does life feel heavier for you than it does for others? Why do you seem to carry burdens people don't even notice? Why were you always the one who saw through the mask, felt the energy shift, and couldn't pretend everything was fine? That's not oversensitivity, it's spiritual encoding. Reuben's story proves that this encoding doesn't wait for applause. Reuben was a logistics manager in Houston who, for years, kept waking up at 3:30 a.m. with a tightness in his chest and visions he didn't understand. He started journaling the dreams. Over time, those journals became a map for a nonprofit that now serves hundreds of at-risk teens with intuitive and prophetic mentorship. Reuben wasn't trying to be chosen. He just couldn't ignore what chose him. What if the weight you carried was never meant to crush you, but to consecrate you? What if the loneliness you felt growing up was the clearing of space for heavenly coordination? And why does your presence now disturb those who used to dismiss you? Could it be that they sensed something in you they tried to deny in themselves, even Jesus, long before his ministry began, was recognized by darkness? In Matthew 2, King Herod launched a massacre of infants, not because Jesus had preached a word, but because he existed. That's how divine contracts work. They threaten systems before they even speak. Haven't you felt that same unspoken resistance? Like something in you was seen as a threat long before you understood what you carried. A young woman named Alicia can testify to that invisible weight. Raised in a quiet Midwestern town, she always felt too intense for her environment. She kept a childhood notebook filled with dreams about battles, voices, and signs. Years later, while working a desk job, she found that same notebook and wept. Every page aligned with what she was now seeing in prayer. She didn't remember signing up for a mission, but the mission remembered her. Today, she mentors spiritual creatives in recognizing covenant assignments hidden in childhood. So when people ask, when did you discover your purpose? Maybe the real question is, when did you stop forgetting? Because this didn't start with a conference, a class, or a pastor's prophecy. It started in eternity. And now, the same forces that tried to distort your vision are retreating in silence as you rise with clarity. Aligned with the voice of heaven, you didn't just accept your purpose, you returned to it. Part 10. You didn't just see people, you saw the system. Chosen one. Have you ever entered a room and immediately felt something wasn't right, even before a single word was spoken? While others saw smiles and surface calm, you sensed tension crawling under every sentence. Why did you always feel like you were reading invisible scripts in places others swore were peaceful? It's because you weren't just reading people. You were reading patterns from childhood. Your eyes were trained on a deeper level. Could that be why they felt threatened? Even when you were silent, your vision was never limited to the obvious. You weren't decoding personalities, you were decoding systems. While most reacted to behavior, you sensed the origin of that behavior. What kind of clarity does it take to see not just what someone is doing, but why they're doing it and where it came from? That's more than sensitivity. That's spiritual surveillance. And people who live in illusion aren't comfortable around those who carry X-ray discernment. In the Gospel of Luke, we see Jesus walk into the synagogue and read the room before he read the scroll. Luke 4:23-30 shows that his words didn't just provoke, they exposed. Without theatrics, he uncovered the pride, control, and insecurity hiding under religious tradition. They tried to throw him off a cliff, not because he lied, but because he saw too clearly. Doesn't that sound familiar? How many times have you been pushed away? Not for being wrong, but for being right too early. You didn't just see people. You saw patterns wrapped in performance. The man who claimed leadership, but led from fear. The friend who offered support, but only when you played small. The workplace that claimed teamwork, but punished honesty. You saw through the choreography. How could you not? You were born with spiritual radar. Yara's story echoes this gift, a marketing executive in Atlanta. She always noticed subtle power shifts in meetings. She sensed when people smiled to hide sabotage and could feel when decisions were made long before votes were cast. When she spoke up about these dynamics, she was labeled difficult, passed over for promotions, but never for her intuition. After resigning, she founded an equity training firm that now helps companies unlearn toxic systems they didn't even realize they were upholding. Her insight, once criticized, became currency. But why did they gaslight you? Why were you made to question a gift that kept you safe? Could it be that your truth threatened the stories they had to keep telling themselves to feel secure? You weren't paranoid, you were precise. And when manipulation didn't work, they turned to dismissal. Too sensitive, too intense, too analytical. But that was never about you. That was about their discomfort with being seen without consent. Malcolm X understood that clarity will always be a threat to systems built on deception. Once feared, later revered, he famously said, "The media is the most powerful entity on earth. They can make the innocent guilty and the guilty innocent." His life wasn't just about resistance. It was about revelation. He saw how institutions operated beneath the rhetoric. That's what you've done. You've unmasked what others depended on for identity. Even Isaiah's encounter with God shifted his vision entirely. In Isaiah 6:5, after seeing the throne, he says, "Woe is me, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell among a people of unclean lips." In a moment, the illusion shattered. Clarity rewrote what comfort had hidden. Have you ever had a moment like that, where you couldn't unsee the truth, no matter how much it cost Jonas? A 24-year-old youth mentor knows this battle well. Raised in a conservative community, he always noticed how unspoken hierarchies ruled behind kindness. He challenged them gently, but consistently. That led to alienation, smears, and eventual expulsion from a leadership team. But within months, those same teams began reaching out privately, saying, "You were the only one who told the truth." Today, he mentors young leaders on how to discern not just what says sus that, but what's systemically sustained. And now, the clarity they mocked is the same force behind your authority. Because once you've seen the system behind the mask, you gain something they can't control: power without permission. That's why you walk differently now. That's why your silence makes noise. So the next time they say you're too much, too sharp, too intense, remember it was never about being too anything. It was about being too awake for their comfort. You weren't born to be fooled. You were born to see. And what you now carry isn't suspicion. It's sacred sight. Part 11. Your life was the mirror. They couldn't escape. Chosen one. Have you noticed how simply walking in truth makes some people squirm? You didn't even have to speak. Your silence was a sermon. Why do you think your presence alone created discomfort in rooms that thrived on pretense? Could it be that authenticity, when embodied fully, becomes a mirror, one that doesn't judge, but still reflects everything that's been avoided? You weren't trying to be better. You were trying to be real. But in a world addicted to performance, realness feels like rebellion, while others curated versions of themselves that fit someone else's mold. You chose to live as your soul instructed. That kind of freedom doesn't need to shout. It simply is. And in the presence of what's real, what's fake starts to tremble. In the Gospel of John, we see this exact tension when Jesus confronts the Pharisees, not with insults, but with light. In John 8:12, he says, "I am the light of the world." But by verse 59, they were ready to stone him. Why? Because light doesn't just illuminate, it exposes. Have you experienced this? The anger that follows your peace. The side eyes when you choose truth over tradition. It was never about arrogance. It was about alignment. You weren't trying to stand out. You just refused to blend in with compromise. And compromise hates being reminded that courage is possible. Isn't that why some people mocked your growth? Not because you were failing, but because you refused to settle, Nina Simone once said. It's an artist's duty to reflect the times in which we live. But long before she was celebrated, she was ostracized for her truth. Her defiance wasn't loud. It was her refusal to dilute herself for public comfort. Her very presence indicted systems. She didn't have to scream to make people shift. Just like you, her presence was a protest, and your truth walked just as loud as your silence. Take Kemi, a community nurse in Oakland, who quietly started refusing to smile when she didn't feel safe. Her co-workers called her difficult, but in truth, she was tired of being palatable at the expense of her boundaries. She stopped attending work happy hours, stopped laughing at microaggressions, and stopped over-explaining her decisions. Over time, other women began doing the same. Kemi didn't start a revolution. She embodied one. Have you noticed how the people who barely acknowledged your struggle were the first to flinch at your success? Why is it that your healing triggered their hidden shame? Could it be that your elevation became a reminder of every dream they buried alive? Isaiah didn't volunteer to be a mirror either. But when he saw the glory of the Lord, he couldn't unsee the corruption around him. In Isaiah 6:8, when God asked, "Whom shall I send?" he said, "Here am I, send me." His message wasn't received with applause, it was met with resistance. But mirrors don't seek approval, they reflect reality. Even a mirror's story tells the same truth. A 38-year-old divorcee and former youth pastor. He left a toxic ministry environment after years of trying to appease controlling leaders. He didn't expose anyone. He just quietly walked away and started teaching Bible study from his backyard. Over time, the very people who mocked his fall began showing up with chairs, not because he forced anything, but because his integrity spoke louder than their rumors, and still, not everyone followed. Why? Because not everyone wants to be called higher. Some have perfected their masks. Some are loyal to their limitations. And when you walked in with peace, clarity, and conviction, they didn't see a friend. They saw a threat to the roles they've rehearsed for years. So no, they weren't mocking you. They were mocking their own missed opportunities. The dreams they dismissed, the truth they silenced. Your journey didn't just inspire, it unsettled. And that's what makes it sacred. You didn't climb to be admired. You rose to breathe. And your refusal to settle became a verdict against every excuse they've clung to. Because light doesn't accuse. It just refuses to apologize for shining. Part 12. You didn't need permission. You needed alignment. Chosen one. Do you remember the moment it shifted? Not with noise, but with knowing. When something in you quietly but firmly decided, no more. You weren't bitter, you were awake. Why did you feel such deep relief in choosing peace over approval? Why did your soul exhale the moment you stopped explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you? Could it be that the thing you needed all along wasn't their permission? It was your permission. You stopped twisting yourself into a version that made others feel safe. You stopped bending your voice to fit rooms that couldn't handle your tone. That decision, soft but seismic, wasn't rebellion, it was realignment. You didn't become defiant, you became divine. And that's what scared them. Because what happens when someone no longer needs applause to breathe? Even Jesus experienced this moment of sovereign clarity. In John 8:14, after being challenged by religious leaders, he responds, "Even if I testify on my own behalf, my testimony is valid, for I know where I came from and where I'm going." He wasn't seeking validation. He was standing in origin and outcome. Isn't that what you did? You reclaimed your coordinates, not because they believed you, but because you finally believed yourself. You didn't just exit dysfunction, you exposed it by thriving beyond it. You stopped feeding systems that starved your authenticity. Have you noticed how the moment you stopped performing for proximity, the people who benefited from your smallness began calling you selfish? But what if their comfort was never your calling? Oprah Winfrey once said, "I had no idea that being your authentic self could make me as rich as I've become. If I had, I'd have done it a lot earlier, but before the billions, before the network." She was told she was too emotional for television, too deep for daytime. She didn't just prove them wrong, she proved herself true. Her wealth isn't just financial, it's spiritual sovereignty, just like yours. You didn't wait to be invited into alignment. You walked into it unannounced. Raylene, a former pastor's wife, had a similar awakening. For years, she conformed, smiling on cue, silencing her intuition, wearing theology like armor. But after a silent breakdown, she sat alone in her garden, journal in hand, and wrote one sentence: "I am tired of betraying myself." That sentence birthed a new life. She left quietly, started a podcast anonymously, and today her voice, gentle but unfiltered, guides thousands toward healing from religious manipulation. Raylene didn't rage against the system. She outgrew it. But how many times were you called rebellious just for reclaiming what was yours? How many people mistook your detachment for arrogance, your discernment for ego? Why is it that wholeness threatens those who only knew you fractured? It's because manipulation only works when insecurity is still alive, and you stopped feeding it. The Apostle Paul echoes this sovereignty in Galatians 1:10 when he writes, "If I was still trying to please people, I would not be a servant of Christ." His freedom wasn't performance-based. It was purpose-bound. Could your freedom be the same? Not flashy, not forceful, just fully formed and no longer available for approval. Then there's Miles, a digital artist from the Bronx. For years, he waited for gallery approval, follower milestones, and influencer nods until one day, sitting in his small apartment, he thought, "What if I created like no one's watching that year?" He posted raw, deeply personal pieces without tags, captions, or hashtags. To his surprise, they spread anyway. His work now hangs in trauma recovery centers across 3 cities. Miles didn't go viral. He got visible by becoming unowned. So when they say you've changed, they're not wrong. You have. Into someone who doesn't beg, who doesn't chase, who doesn't flinch in the absence of applause. You're no longer programmable, no longer waiting, because your soul has remembered what your ego forgot. You answer to God and only God. That's not defiance. That's deliverance. And now, chosen one. You are not just free, you are untouchable. Part 13. Your humility was never softness, it was sovereignty. Chosen one. Have you ever felt the weight of knowing more than you reveal? Of seeing clearly while being underestimated? Why did your calm disturb them more than confrontation would have? Why did your silence unsettle those who were louder but less anchored? It's because your humility was never passive. It was precise. It wasn't a posture of weakness. It was the hidden armor of someone chosen to wield power without becoming consumed by it from the outside. They mistook your restraint for confusion. They assumed you had nothing to say when, in truth, you had everything to discern. You didn't rush to prove yourself because you never forgot who you were. Can power exist quietly and still shift everything in the room? Absolutely. And you carried that kind of power, not showy, but strategic, not loud, but lethal in purpose. King David knew this form of sacred self-control. When Saul pursued him with murderous jealousy, David had multiple chances to strike back but didn't. In 1 Samuel 24, David cuts off a piece of Saul's robe instead of taking his life, saying, "I will not stretch out my hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed." He wasn't weak, he was wise. Isn't that the same strength you've chosen? holding back not because you're incapable, but because your calling is too holy to waste on ego-driven battles. You moved with intention while they moved for attention. You studied the room, not to dominate it, but to protect what you carried. Have you ever wondered why you could hear what wasn't said or see through performances before the mask even slipped? That's not overthinking. That's spiritual decoding. You weren't just watching behavior. You were mapping blueprints of the soul. Fred Rogers, the beloved creator of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, was never loud, never flashy, but his stillness shaped generations. While the world praised charisma and spectacle, Rogers chose gentleness, sincerity, and deep listening. He wasn't passive. He was profoundly intentional. Behind every slow word and quiet pause was a strategic soul protecting children's hearts from noise and chaos. His humility wasn't absence of strength. It was the restraint of someone who could shift culture without shouting. Isn't that the very essence of what you've been doing? Holding power without needing to parade it. Kendra's story reveals this same depth. A performance coach in Chicago. She was often dismissed as too quiet during early team meetings, but she observed everything. Power dynamics, tension patterns, unspoken pressure points. After 6 months of silence, she offered a single insight that unraveled months of conflict. That moment led to her becoming the lead strategist for internal mediation. Kendra didn't raise her voice. She raised the vibration. Her stillness wasn't absence. It was authority. Why is it that those who overlook the patient ones are always the most surprised when they rise? Why do people call you soft until your strategy silences the entire room? It's because spiritual maturity doesn't advertise, it anchors. And anchoring takes restraint. Your silence was never hiding. It was fortifying. It was the language of someone who doesn't move to be seen but moves when God says move. That kind of control can't be manipulated. That kind of depth can't be discredited. Even Jesus modeled this divine discernment in Matthew 27:14 when accused before Pilate. He made no reply, not even to a single charge. To the great amazement of the governor, the silence wasn't defeat, it was dominance. It was the authority of someone who understood that eternity doesn't explain itself to ego. Eli, a middle school teacher from Denver, understood this instinctively, surrounded by competitive colleagues who constantly fought for visibility. He remained in the background until one day, a school-wide behavioral crisis erupted. Eli, without notes, led a staff debrief rooted in emotional intelligence and spiritual calm. His leadership stunned the room. He was no longer overlooked. He was trusted. Why? Because he had prepared in silence. He wasn't waiting to perform. He was waiting for purpose. So now, chosen one, your humility has matured into unshakable sovereignty. The ones who once saw you as soft now realize you were simply sovereign. Your patience wasn't passivity. It was prophecy, waiting for activation. You weren't designed to scream. You were designed to reign. Part 14. You were the prophecy they tried to discredit. Chosen one. What they didn't realize was that the fire they lit beneath you didn't burn you. It refined you. You didn't rise in secret. You rose in surveillance. While most people require silence to gather strength, you had to build while being watched, judged, doubted, and dissected. Have you ever stopped to consider what it takes to create beauty in a battlefield? To plant purpose in a place poisoned by gossip? You didn't have the luxury of waiting for applause. You had to move without claps, speak without echoes, and trust without mirrors. Why did they underestimate you? Was it your humility, your quiet tone, your refusal to self-promote? They mistook your stillness for smallness, but stillness was your strategy. Your rise wasn't crafted, it was commissioned. What you carried couldn't be coached, copied, or killed. And while they watched, hoping you'd crumble, heaven was documenting your endurance. Every time they tried to derail you, the spiritual contract on your life reactivated with greater precision. Could it be that every attempt to expose you only revealed their own lack of discernment? The same pattern appeared long before you in the life of Esther, a young woman who never sought a crown but carried a calling. Unlike many heroes, her rise happened in full view of those who underestimated her. Haman plotted her people's destruction while she quietly prepared a strategy that would dismantle it. When she stepped before the king uninvited, risking death, it wasn't a performance, it was prophecy. Esther 4:14 reminds us, and who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. Her courage wasn't loud, but it shifted an empire. You've carried that same anointing, quiet power in the face of targeted opposition, the kind of power that doesn't retaliate, it recalibrates. The kind of presence that unnerves people, not because of what you say, but because of what you survived without collapsing. Take a look at fashion mogul Virgil Abloh. Before designing for Louis Vuitton, he was dismissed as a streetwear guy, someone too unconventional for high fashion. Critics rolled their eyes. Insiders whispered. But Virgil didn't just disrupt the industry, he redefined it. Everything I do is for the 17-year-old version of myself. He once said, his rise wasn't fueled by approval, but by clarity. He didn't match their volume. He matched his assignment. Your journey has echoed this same rhythm. People saw the surface and judged the process, but they didn't know what was encoded in your spirit. How could they? You weren't building for attention. You were building under divine instruction. How do you explain an invisible contract? How do you translate alignment to people obsessed with applause? And then there's Eniola, a high school custodian in North Carolina who secretly tutored failing students after hours. She did it quietly, never mentioning the degrees she earned overseas that were never recognized in the US. Teachers mocked her accent. Students often ignored her. Until one day, a parent discovered that her son, once facing expulsion, was now top of his class, all because of Miss Eniola. Word spread. The school board found out. And today, she leads a pilot mentorship program for immigrant youth. Her reward didn't come from exposure. It came from obedience. How many times did they think your silence was weakness? How often did they try to duplicate your moves without understanding your motives? How many copied your style, hoping to steal your spotlight, yet failed to realize your shine came from surrender, not spectacle? Jesus himself embodied this paradox. He didn't arrive as the warrior they expected, a throne. And they got a carpenter. They mocked him, doubted him, called him delusional, yet in full public view, he performed miracles, withstood betrayal, and walked toward crucifixion carrying purpose, not pride. And when he rose, he didn't shout it, he simply showed up. The prophecy fulfilled, not performed. How many of your enemies are now shocked, not by your success, but by your stillness? Leora, a single mother who lost everything in a business scam, knows that kind of quiet power. With 2 children and no financial support, she began baking at night and selling at dawn. At first, no one noticed. She delivered pastries anonymously to shelters and recovery homes. 3 years later, her nonprofit, Bread of Light, operates in 4 cities. When asked how she did it, she replied, "God never needed me to be famous. He needed me to be faithful." Leora didn't rise to prove a point. She rose to fulfill a purpose. And now, chosen one, the same ones who dismissed your discernment call it brilliance. The same ones who laughed at your labor study, your methods in silence. Because what they call delusion was actually divine direction. You didn't just beat the odds. You became the revelation, the prophecy fulfilled in flesh and motion. They still don't understand how you came through all that. Focused, radiant, unshaken. But you do. You know it was never about proving them wrong. It was about proving God right. And now, chosen one, take a moment and breathe this in. You didn't just carry out a mission, you embodied one. You didn't just finish the race. You ran it with fire in your bones and a target on your back. And still, here you are. The prophecy fulfilled, not just in word, but in flesh. You're living proof that God doesn't need approval to release his anointing. He just needs someone willing to walk in obedience, even when no one else claps. This wasn't about proving your worth to them. It was about awakening the truth in you. Your calling was never built for comfort. It was forged for consecration. And the fact that you're still standing, radiant, focused, untouchable, isn't just a win, it's a revelation. The revelation that destiny cannot be delayed by mockery, dismantled by sabotage, or defeated by silence. You did the impossible in plain view. And you did it without compromising who you are. So now, don't shrink back. Don't dim your light to make others comfortable. Don't apologize for the authority you've been entrusted with. This is not the time to be timid. This is the time to be anchored in the knowing that heaven backed your blueprint before earth even caught up. If this word stirred something in you, if it reminded you of the truth you've always carried but were afraid to name, comment 777 below as your declaration. I'm not here by chance. I was sent. Share this message with someone who needs to remember the fire they carry. And to those who've supported this mission, whether through your time, your comments, your prayers, or even a super thanks, thank you. Your light fuels this space, and your presence here is no small thing. Before we close, let me bless you. May the clarity that found you in the dark now lead you boldly into the light. May the strength you forged in solitude become a banner of peace wherever you go. May you walk into every room with the quiet confidence of someone who knows they made it through what should have buried them. And may the next chapter of your life confirm every silent yes you gave when no one was watching. You've already done the impossible, and this is only the beginning.